We were able to catch up with our guest this morning on Up Close a few weeks back on Acadiana's Morning News. Now we're going to have a chance to get even more in depth with our guest, Kevin Foote. Kevin works for the Daily Advertiser here in Lafayette, and you also hear him on our sister station, ESPN 1420. You hear him, Monday through Friday, every weekday. And usually what I end up hearing is a lot of yelling. Oh, wait, no, that's passion coming through. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate the chance to do this with you.
Yes, it's always nice.
Well, I want to, for those who may not have heard the interview on Acadiana's Morning News, let's start at the very beginning, Kevin, and I want you to tell me what it was like to be a 7-year-old kid, where you grew up. Did you think you wanted to be, a fireman, an artist? I mean, what was it like to be 7-year-old Kevin Foote?
Well, I was growing up. I actually grew up when I was real young on the north side of town. Mm-hmm. I went to St. Genevieve. I guess that meant I was headed towards Turling's Catholic if all things would have stayed the same, but they did not. And between my kindergarten year and my first grade year, we moved, which was out then and considered the country, not so much anymore. I still remember my address. It was Route 1, Box 157D, Dusson, Louisiana 70529. So it was called Dusson, but it's kind of the Giudice area. It's Congress Extension. It's a lot more houses in that area now than there was back then, obviously. So, we had just moved in. We moved into a trailer on the property while the house was built. And I don't know when we moved in, probably December or January, either December of 73 or January of 74, right in there. And then in May of 74, my father was killed. So May 17th, 1974. So I don't know how long we were he was in the new house, 4, 5, 6 months, something like that.
I mean, it just boggles the mind. Now, for those people who do not know, it's not like your dad just, woke up, had an aneurysm, and he was gone. I mean, this was homicide.
Yes, he woke up on the morning. We learned from reading that my dad went. Normally, a lot of people, I don't know, go to work. You go to, like Stevie P goes to work 4 a.m.
Yeah.
He typically went to work between 8:30 and 9, and sometime between 8:30 and 9 on his way to work, he stopped. For years we sat on the side of the road, but since I started this investigation and seen actually some of the pictures, he actually was in the road.
Like the car.
The car was literally still in the road. He was stopped.
Middle of the road.
Of the middle of the road, and was shot in his vehicle on the way to work.
So he was sitting in his vehicle then?
He was sitting in his vehicle, actually leaned over from what I understand. He had financial ledgers to the right of him, and he was kind of leaning over. He was shot twice. Well, 3 shots were fired, 1 grazed, from what we understand. I'm not a real good reader of autopsies. Okay,
right. Who
I don't
necessarily
have that kind of mind to
right.
look at all the details that are. And when you read an autopsy, if you've never done it, I had never read one until I tried
before
to read.
This. Yeah,
it's just so intricate, but it sounded like grazed his cheek and hit the door on the front passenger side, and the other 2 did not miss him. So,
and he's fatally wounded, shot like that. You're a 7-year-old kid. Your mother at this time has how many other children?
My brother Marcus was 3, going to be 4 in July, and my brother Jason was 1, going to be turned 2 on June the 1st, 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later, my God.
In fact, on his birthday, June the 1st, we did not go. My mom, we were all scared to death, obviously.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And so we did not go back home. We actually slept for those 2 weeks at my aunt and uncle's house, who lived, ironically, right behind Doug Ashey at the time. And on off of Johnson.
Yeah.
And we didn't actually go back home until that June for Jason's birthday party on June the 1st.
On that time.
Yeah, my aunt's have a cousin named Brad, who was born on the 5th, and Jay was born on the 1st, 4 days apart. So they kind of grew up together and had both of their birthday parties that day at our house. That was our first time back, from what I understand.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple things that we have to ask about. Number one, you mentioned that there were financial ledgers on the seat of the car where your dad was slumped over, and you mentioned that you were scared. Now, I mean, if someone is murdered in your family, obviously you would be scared. But if you would, kind of describe that for us and why your mother and the rest of the family were so scared.
Well, what came out of all of this is, and I've learned more now since we started investigating this in January of 2017. The dad had been trying to figure out why money was missing, or the books wasn't all adding up for months. And really going back to the previous year.
And what was his position now?
He was the area manager of the American Red Cross. In Lafayette. And so money had been missing for quite a while, and he had struggled. Like, Mom knew about it.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure he didn't tell Mom everything, but
sure.
After hearing Mom's interview or reading Mom's interview the day of, and the 3 different long extended interviews with the Sheriff's Department back in 74, the transcripts of them, you could tell he had kind of told her at least a lot of it. They were trying to, and at the end, trying to figure out between themselves, like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
So on the Wednesday, which would have been May 15th, 1974, they discovered with the source, with the help of a lady at the bank, Guaranty Bank, where the money was coming from. And so the missing money, what the source of that was. And so 2 days later, on his way to work with
2
ledgers.
days right after that meeting
after they figured out on the Wednesday, now we know for sure. There were suspicions, but now we know for sure why the money was missing and what the source of that is. 2 days later, on his way to work, he's killed with financial ledgers in his car.
And he's gunned down in the car. That is in the middle of the roadway,
in the middle of the road, which is just so.
Yeah, give us
it's around where Acadian Food Mark is. Like about, I don't know, what is that, a quarter mile from Acadiana High School. Yeah.
So right in that corridor.
It was called Gilbo Extension back then.
Okay.
But we were living out, towards Dussault. He was on his way to town on what is now Congress Extension, in the general vicinity of where Acadian Food Mart is, on the way into town.
Your mother must have been petrified.
Yes, and the other part of this fear thing, I mean, again, understand, she had just learned how to drive. She was a typical. Wow. She had just started working, I don't know how long, at Fisher's.
Yes.
Daycare, which is on Ridge Road.
Yes.
And all those houses between Fisher's towards where the Circle now is, or Rue des Billets, is like relatives. Like, that's all my dad's
side
mother's
of the
family, all up on that road on the between Fisher's and where the Circle is now. Back then, that was Alamon's grocery store. My papa used to bring me down to get candy at Alamon's grocery store on Ridge Road. But anyway, when it happened, so she had 3 young kids. She was kind of had like a little part-time job. She had just learned how to drive, and then all of a sudden, her husband's dead.
How heartbreaking!
And so it was awful,
and under these weird circumstances.
Yes, and so as time went on, somewhere I think in November it went through the grand jury, and then the embezzlement part didn't get through the grand jury.
Okay, well let's crack the safe on that one, if you will. Tell me more about that.
Okay, as it turned out, his secretary, whose name was Gwen Roy Gainey, was the one guilty, and she pleaded guilty.
She pleaded guilty in court.
Got probation. That's a whole other story that we might get to a little bit later. But anyway. In November, it was, the embezzlement. But the murder did not get through for whatever reason, and we have thoughts on that we might get to. But the murder part did not get through the grand jury, but the embezzlement did. So as it dragged on, also involved in all of this, a month before the murder, there were 2 fires, one smaller and one big one. So there was an arson investigation involved in all this too. So there was an arson from April of 74 in May that my dad was killed, and there was missing money going back to the previous year in 73. And so the police at the time believed, and the fire chief and all that believed that there was a direct correlation connection between the arson and the murder. And the embezzlement, that it was all together.
All right.
So the only thing, for whatever reason, the arson investigation was dropped. I mean, there's no evidence now of the arson investigation.
What was that? There's no other information?
I've
Did we know even who investigated that?
Jack Monasse was the one who
was like the head of the fire department, or
Wayne
arson?
Prejean was the police chief, I believe, at the time, but the one who was in charge of the arson investigation was Jack Monasse, who now I believe does wildlife and fisheries in the governor's office. So he was in charge of that. Everything that we read from the file is that he firmly believed. In fact, we have it's part of our, if you go into theadvertiser.com and look at the actual story, there's a link in there with the Channel 10 news report.
Like a soundbite, basically.
The actual soundbite from October or November 1974 on Channel 10 with Bruce Conk, who's now still he works,
he's
involved in
the council,
in the city council, parish council. And he gave the report that, I don't know, have it word for word, but basically what he said was, our source with the fire department says that there's a direct connection between the arson and the murder of Russell Foote. So
wow.
So that's what was believed. Well, as time went on, nothing happened. The arson investigation just kind of went into thin air for whatever reason.
Wow.
There's still to this day no record, local or state fire marshal, any record of the arson investigation. No record of the arson investigation.
Is there a record of the murder investigation?
There's no record of the grand jury anymore either.
No record of the grand jury
even taking place.
Whoa.
Now, we know a grand jury took place because we've interviewed people through this process of people that were, testified in the grand jury. So we know there was a grand jury on this, but there is no record of the grand jury, which is also curious. So as time went on and Mom got nothing, she began developing this opinion like, what's going on here? Is there some sort of cover-up? This seems pretty obvious.
So it made her extremely nervous.
Boom, boom, boom. During that time, there were things taking place like I can remember being a kid and being at home and it'd be at night and car just circling our home.
Now, were there you had a lot of neighbors or?
No, it wasn't a lot of, there was houses across the street and on the side and there was a coulee, but we had an acre of land. So there was plenty of room. And now if you ever went to see the house, they have so much stuff. There's no way anybody could circle it now. But back then, it was pretty much an acre of land with a house in the middle. There was a basketball goal in the back and a little shed where you put the lawnmower and stuff.
Right.
But you could circle the house back then. And there were, at night circling the house. I can remember being in the house and, we would come home and there was always this seemed like someone was watching or following or someone would pull away who was kind of. So there were things being done to make us feel like this whole situation wasn't over yet.
Wow.
And,
all right.
And then on top of that, the police seemed to be dropping the case. So there were, for years and years and years, the thought process was that there's a cover-up. We still could be in danger. What's going on?
We are continuing our conversation with Kevin Foote. He is the sports editor over at the Daily Advertiser, and he appears Monday through Friday on ESPN 1420, talking about the 1974 murder of his father, Russell Foote. On the way, we're going to talk more about what is known now, why Kevin has chosen and his brothers have decided that they wanted to look into all of this now. And so all of that is coming up on Up Close. Kevin Foote is our guest today on Up Close as we examine and look into the circumstances surrounding his father's 1974 murder. Russell Foote was the executive director, if you will, of the Acadiana Red Cross at that time. And as we have looked at this case over time, he obviously has done the investigative side of this, and one of the editors with the Daily Advertiser has also joined him in this quest. I have merely done just a couple of interviews back and forth with you, but I have been fascinated about the entire case. I want to ask you, you began to tell us a little bit about this idea of being frightened. And your mom, obviously, it's a frightening time. Your father's been murdered. You had told me in the past that at night, sometimes you'd hear the doorknob jiggle.
Yeah.
I mean, these were not just, the imaginations of a child. This was your mother and, knowing these things too. And what was it, did Miss Jackie, your mother, that fear over all those years, she just unfortunately kind of let it go by the wayside for many years, but then later on, never heard anything?
Right. For a while, I don't know how long, but for many years, she kind of, did she want it to be solved? Of course she wanted it to be solved, but she didn't, I guess, press or continue. I'm sure she had conversations with the sheriff's department. I don't know. But my perception was that she was worried for her kids' safety. Like, there were messages being told. Plus, there was, after a year or two, she started developing this idea that someone didn't want this to be solved.
That's what she felt in her heart and her mind.
Didn't want this to be solved. And so, because it seemed so obvious, like it was boom, boom, boom. It wasn't like there, I watch crime shows all the time, and sometimes there's someone dies, and then there's, no one has any idea why they killed. There's no clue for motive or possible suspect or anything. Well, they had a prime suspect. They had an apparent motive, and they, seem to have means and opportunity. So, she was confused as to why, and very angry and frustrated as to why there wasn't solved. So, anytime there was, okay, let's go, there was always the thought, well, if we push too hard, am I in danger? If we push too hard, if there's someone who doesn't want this solved, could we have another tragedy in our family?
That's frightening.
It very much is. So every, I don't know, 3, 4 years, over the years, we would discuss it, and the comments that were made were always, okay, if there was a cover up, is that person in charge still living?
Right. Okay. Great question.
Absolutely. Right. There are still people who, if you read the case, whose names are still involved in the community now.
Right.
The TV reporter, like, and I'm not saying please calm. I'm just saying,
not saying that.
But
it's just there's people
those people are still living.
Yeah, sure.
And still have, some stroke in the community. So,
but you're not in any way implying anything like that.
No, anybody is. I'm just saying, from our perception, it was okay. If there was a cover up, that person could still have a lot to lose. That person could still be involved. And so that's why, and I say all that because when in what would have been February, I think it was February when we first talked to the sheriff's department last year, their first question to us was, why are you bringing this up now?
I think that's what other people want to know now too. And it's because I would assume, how do you not know? How do you go all your life? How did your mom do it? How did all three of you boys do this?
Well, Marcus and Jason, as I told you, were 1 and 3.
They were tiny.
And they don't have any memories of my father.
Yeah.
None. And so I have memories of my father. So it's more real to me than I think to them because they were so young, they don't have any memories. But Mom, she had 2 marriages after that, and neither one of them worked. And she was tortured her whole life.
That was the love of her life.
That was her life. She asked why.
Yes.
In her last year of her life, my mom died of leukemia in August of 2015. In fact, she died on a Wednesday. The Friday was the wake. It would have been Mom and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary on the day of her wake. So she died. In the last year of her life, she had more peace about it than I think she had ever had it. But still, she asked why, and in the last 2 or 3 years of her life, she would say, "We got to find out what happened. We got to find out what happened." And so, when you're doing that, you're thinking, one, is there is there still any danger? Because we all have kids now and families, and two, how do you start? Like,
where do
none
you
of us
start?
are, detectives,
right?
So it's like, where do you start? Well, around that same year or two before, there was the Jackson Clarion Ledger. The Daily Advertiser is a Gannett paper, and also a Gannett paper is the Jackson Clarion Ledger in Mississippi. And there's a writer there named Jerry Mitchell who's been writing cold case kind of stories, like really big ones, like ex-civil rights leaders and that kind of stuff, really historic ones. He's been doing these cold case investigations for years and years and years. Well, one day, a lady calls him and says, if you want a story, I'm fixing to go knock on the trailer of a man that I believe killed my daughter.
Wow.
So Jerry Mitchell goes with her to this guy. His name is Felix Vale. And so it sparks his interest, and he does this big feature called Gone. You can go on put up Gone and Felix Vale, according to everything in that case, killed 3 of his wives back in the 60s. And he, because of Jerry Mitchell's story about this that he did, the first wife that he killed was actually homecoming queen in Eunice.
Yes.
In the 60s.
That's right.
And he got convicted 2 years ago in Lake Charles for the murder of this lady.
And it had been 40
Eunice.
plus years, I guess.
Back from the 60s, yes.
Yeah.
And now he didn't get convicted for the second or third, even though there are people that believe he did that. But
right.
He got convicted and put away in prison for the rest of his life for that. And so we helped out in the coverage of that case.
Right.
And so this was like in, I don't know, sometime in the fall of 2016. Well, one day in January of 2017, Kristen Askelson, my boss, managing editor of the paper, comes to me and says, they did this and it worked. How about
why not?
Why not? Why don't we do the same kind of thing to your dad? So I called a family member, my brothers, and I said, should we do this? And they were like, it's up to you. If you want to do it, they supported me, but they're not going to actually do as much of, you're going to have to do the legwork.
Right.
So,
right.
I got the blessing from everyone I asked, and I came back on a Monday and I said, let's do it.
So we're talking with Kevin Foote. His dad, Russell Foote, was murdered in 1974. Russell was the head of the Acadiana American Red Cross, basically at that time. We're talking about the pursuing situation that has gone on for years and how everything started in terms of investigating. So you and Kristen, you sit down and decide, okay, we're going to do this.
Start this. So the first thing I did was write down everyone's name that I remembered as a child being friends with my parents, co-workers with my parents. And I had a good source because Bruce Brown was the one that hired me at the paper and was the sports editor of the paper for years.
Okay.
Bruce Brown was one of 4 college students who were it was like part of their curriculum. I don't know the exact technical, but they were working with the Red Cross.
Somewhat like an internship, I guess.
An internship kind of thing. And so he knew the other 4 members. One of them is Keith Trahan, whose wife ran the United Way. Mike, you know more about that.
Miss
Margaret, yeah.
Okay.
And one of them was a lady named Jean Trahan, who doesn't live in the area anymore. And one of them is a gentleman named Richard Hinkey, who owns a security system thing. So I was able to call all these people. And then they obviously gave me more names. Al Simon, who's another famous name in Lafayette history. He was a coach. He was city council. He was the director of the Red Cross board at that time.
At the board, okay.
So I contacted him. He's like 90 years old, and he's still teaching PE at Jackson State University.
That's
when
awesome.
I talked to him last year. Unbelievable career he had. But so and those people told me about more people. And so we just started calling and finding out and talking to people that I either never met in my life or that I remember as a child. And those first few weeks were just so, I don't know what word, you could say awesome, or it was strange. I had people just tell me these things. Like one guy said, when I heard your voicemail, I recognized your dad's voice.
Wow.
I just knew it was Russell's son who was leaving that voice.
Coming through
you hear things like that. I had one gentleman say,
Kevin,
I wonder how long it would take for someone to call.
You're giving me goosebumps.
Yeah. And one gentleman said,
he said,
I wonder how long it would take for someone to call me about this. So when
you
hear things like that,
it's not like you and your mom
were the only
and your
ones.
Brothers were the only ones ever sitting around wondering
because
about
the people who were there and people who served on the grand jury,
I was going to say, was
and
your
the
dad,
people who testified, they were. My dad was part of the Satoma Club, so he knew. He knew a lot of people.
That's what I was going to say. It seems like he was very well liked.
Yes,
and part of the community.
So those people waited for years. Well, how come nothing's happening? Like, what's
how could
going
they not
on?
Solve the case.
I talked to a lot of people. Like, I always wondered, why? Like, why nothing? Why did we not ever hear anything about this again? In fact, not only, and I mentioned earlier that the arson investigation records are gone, the grand jury records are gone, all the evidence was destroyed. The physical evidence is destroyed.
So you're
there's no
telling
physical
me
evidence.
There's
also no arson investigation records. There's no grand jury investigation records.
Okay, so there are no grand jury records
Not even a record that the grand jury exists.
had met,
Yeah.
and that they had the true bill on the embezzlement side.
Right.
Okay, so no grand jury for this that they met about this case, no physical evidence, no material to cite the arson investigation.
Correct. Fortunately, what there is
tell me
all
what,
of the
what you do
what
have.
they did find is
Now, and we have to remember,
transcripts.
this
is
has
a long
been
time
years.
ago.
This
Yes.
is a long time ago.
None of this that I'm saying definitely means
No,
that there's some massive
right.
conspiracy
No.
cover-up.
You're not suggesting
What it
that.
does is it doesn't totally eliminate it either.
Sure. I mean, it begs the question.
Right. But what
What happens
fortunately,
now?
what they were able to find when we went to the sheriff's department is, and from what I've learned since, it wasn't all together in one box. It was all over the place.
Wow, yeah,
And that they
yeah.
had to put
Because it was
many
years.
hours of working together.
Yes, yes.
Was the transcript, there's a lot of
So they put a
details
lot
about
of work
the
in on
embezzlement.
this. Yeah.
There's a lot of, most of the files about the embezzlement,
Okay.
which was interesting at the time. You had to do
Sure.
it, but now, she pleaded guilty to that, and she already.
And this is this Gwen Roy Gainey.
Gainey.
Okay.
She pleaded guilty to that and served probation. That's I don't. If we have time, we'll get into that, which is also very interesting. But the murder part, there are things about the investigation. There's all kind of. There's 700 pages of paper,
Wow.
and most of it is like check stubs and the paper trail to find out the embezzlement. But a lot of it is transcripts of interviews that were done with mom and with different people that were involved. So
Okay.
there was
that might have
a lot of
either
stuff to look through
interned.
to give
Right.
us something to find out, to people to interview. We also, fortunately, the lead investigator on the case back then was a guy named Guy Bernadette,
Okay.
who is still living and who was very, I remember I called him up and said, Mr. Barnett, my name is Kevin Foote. Do you know I am? And he says, yes, sir. And I say, my father was Russell Foote. Do you remember who he was? And he said, oh, yes, sir.
Wow.
And so, those kind of things just
Yeah.
will be etched in my memory forever. And he was very gracious, and we went to his house, and he explained everything that he remembered. We
from
met
that time.
for 2 hours. He told us his memory of the case and what he thought and what he did and all of that. So, again, those are things that if we hadn't done this, I would never have had that.
Right.
So are there still questions? Absolutely. But do I know way more about everything that took place than I did in January, before January 7, 2017? Absolutely. I know way more. So if nothing else comes of this, at least I have a much greater knowledge of what took place.
All right. We shall continue our story. I'm going to ask about Gwen Roy Gainey on the way this morning and find out about the embezzlement. He spoke to us, Kevin did, our guest Kevin Foote today, about the embezzlement case and how that relates to this. We'll go more in depth on the way when we continue with Up Close. We continue our conversation now with sports engagement editor of the Daily Advertiser, Kevin Foote, who joins us on Up Close this morning. We've been talking about the 1974 murder of his father. His father was found slumped over the seat of his vehicle, slumped over really some financial documents. This was on what was known as the Gilbo Road extension in 1974. The car was basically found in the middle of the roadway. And you referenced a person earlier when you were talking to us, Gwen Roy Gainey. Now, tell me about that and the embezzlement, and tell us, what you have come to learn while looking into all of this.
I could be a month off or so, but basically, I don't have the file right in front of me. But in February of 1973, she began working as a secretary for the Red Cross under my dad. About a month later, we didn't know it. They didn't know it at the time, but the records, when you go back and look at the file, about a month later, money started being missing in March of 73. And, from talking to my brothers and my uncles and things, for a month or two before, Dad was like not himself, like trying to figure out what's the money being
yeah,
missing.
I would
And
imagine.
then on that Wednesday, as I said earlier, 2 days before he was murdered on May 15, 74, he found out for sure, with help from a Guaranty Bank employee who testified in the case and in the grand jury and all, that it was his secretary, Gwen Gainey. She eventually pleaded guilty.
Okay.
She went to immediately to another job and embezzled money from that job as well. And so it was actually a concurrent, that is the fancy word, embezzlement.
Okay, that's what they.
So
okay.
she went to the trial, and it was in Lafayette. And for some reason, they decided to move it to Abbeville, the sentencing of it. No one at the time.
Okay, so the trial is in
it
Lafayette?
all took place in Lafayette. It was in Lafayette. She pleaded guilty. They were going to come for the sentencing of her. To my knowledge, it was supposed. I was told it was she was supposed to get 6 years. She was a mother and she was pregnant, and they said they were going to move the sentencing to Abbeville a month later.
Okay.
No one has been able to explain to me why that took place. I have no idea.
Okay.
So they move it to Abbeville. And her attorney at the time was Joe Corey. He steps up in Abbeville and says at the beginning of the sentencing trial, and I know this just because I talked to two people who were actually in the proceeding who told me all of this.
Okay.
And stands up and says, "Can I have a meeting in chamber?" Carol Spell, who is from Indian Bayou, was the judge. My father graduated in Indian Bayou. In fact, I've been told that it's possible we're like third or fourth cousins or whatever.
Wow.
But or my father was. So Joe Corey goes into chambers with Carol Spell. They come out with a 5-year suspended sentence, probation, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
She doesn't fulfill any of the terms of the probation. And in 1980, she's released. I guess that's fairly, I don't know how normal that is, but she's released from her probation even though she didn't fulfill any of the terms of the probation, which includes psychiatric evaluation and normal meetings. She was always late for the meetings, and she didn't attend her psychiatric evaluations like she was supposed to, and all that. So anyway,
so this is all things you've looked at and
well,
learned.
It's all that's in the file.
Oh, it's all in the file.
All of those documents
yes,
are in the file.
Yes, please beg my forgiveness on
that.
that.
So that file, which of 700 pages, a lot about the embezzlement, but there's things like parole and probation reports and stuff like that end in about 1980 when she was let off of the probation. Well, since then, and this is all in the story that we did that came out, not ironically, but May 17th, the anniversary of my dad's murder.
And we have it at KPEL 965. We have part of the story, which does link to your story and Kristen's work and your work together.
Right, and there's also a big timeline there. There are videos with some reactions. So it's all, if you go to the story at the advertiser.com or on your time, you can see, there are links within that big story that you can get all of this. But since then, she, in the 80s, she was in Lake Charles. She was in Shreveport. She's spent 12 years in prison, which my mom never knew she did for subsequent. Well, I say for subsequent. What happened was she kept getting in trouble and kept stealing money. Okay. And finally, at one point in 1989, a Judge Hood in Lake Charles said, in his speech to her, mentioned the Red Cross case of 1974, mentioned the trouble she had got in and got acquitted for later in Lake Charles in the late 70s, and then mentioned stealing money here and mentioned stealing money there and mentioned stealing money here and said, you've been getting away with this forever. You're not getting away with this anymore. And she spent 12 years in St. Gabriel. My mom died thinking, my mom lost track of her after, once we got into the 80s. Knew about the one that she got acquitted for in 78, 79, which added to the thought that something's not right. Why is she getting away with all this stuff? She kept getting away with stuff. Yeah. So that added to the, why in the world is she getting away with everything? But anyway, and she goes to prison. My mom thought she spent 30 days in jail her whole life. And I remember at the time she was sentenced to 30 days as part of the 5 days probation. She did have 30 days in jail. That happened in November. She didn't have to serve it until January so she could spend Christmas with her family, which I remember my mom being very, very, very angry about. Those are just memories as a kid.
Right.
Now, understand it's never even gotten through a grand jury. So the lead investigator has an opinion. Mm-hmm. My mom had an opinion.
Mm-hmm. But it didn't.
She's
make
never
it
been tried for this,
right.
So we have no idea, beyond a shadow of a doubt.
So part of the reason that you're hoping, by the continued interviews that you have done, the series that you did with the advertiser, is that maybe someone will remember something or come forward with information?
I think there are people, I'm convinced that there are people who are still living who know way more than they've told us. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they haven't told us anything.
Well, was there anyone that witnessed anything that happened that day?
There was no quote-unquote witness, but there was a gentleman at the time who they interviewed who saw a car behind Dad's car and saw someone leaning over into the Dad's station wagon. So there was some... It was not of the actual crime, but theoretically right after the crime.
Right after the crime.
Or maybe right before the crime. I don't know.
Right. And do you know
maybe
whether...
during it. It was an older gentleman, and he's now
deceased, long
dead. But we don't really... I don't know that the cops ever knew what he saw. Was it before, right after, or
it
after
begs the question,
the murder?
Did they talk to him? Did this man appear before the grand jury? And you don't know?
I don't know for a fact that he appeared before the grand jury, but I know I read his transcript of the interview. So I think he appeared in the grand jury, yes.
Wow.
But I don't know that for a fact.
Interesting.
But I did read his testimony. And so, he identified the vehicle. Mm-hmm. And so he saw the back of a person who he said was a person wearing loose-fitting clothes, and he identified as a male.
Okay.
Now, this is the 70s with long hair, so who knows? But that played into...
What kind of... Do you know what kind of hair the Gwen woman had at that time?
To my knowledge, she had short, darker hair.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so...
If people do remember this, or they're hearing this and they think, well, I happen to be, not that the chance is really there, but I mean, you never know with somebody passing through that area.
It's crazy that I talked to someone who used to live across the street from me where we were living at that time after the story came out. They actually ran into someone who remembers driving by my dad's vehicle that day. Think about how bizarre that is. Not seeing anything.
No.
But remembering being a child on the way to school, driving by and seeing that white station wagon that day, thinking it was just broken down in the middle of the road. And there may have been my dad's body in there at the time. I don't know that. But
you have no
think
way of
about
knowing,
how crazy that is.
Yeah, it is. It's
really bizarre.
Crazy.
Unbelievable twists and turns and things that have happened since we started this investigation.
So then we go back to Gwen Gainey, and so this embezzlement case was, she pleaded guilty to embezzling money from the Red Cross.
Right. And her next employer.
And the next employer.
Yes.
As well. So where is this woman today?
Well, she's living in a small town in Louisiana, as far as I know. I haven't spoken to her.
Right.
We attempted to contact her for the article for the simple, to tell her, look, we're going to have this article coming out. Your name is going to be in it. If you want to comment, please comment.
That's what we do,
we're giving you the right to comment. We don't want to just spring this on you. And so, but we were never able to contact her. I guess I can assume, but we haven't tried to contact her and made those efforts last year, so it's been a year since that happened. So I don't know where she is other than.
So where are we today? And we're joined by Kevin Foote. He's joining us to talk a little bit about the circumstances surrounding his father's homicide that happened in 1974. His dad at that time was heading up the local Red Cross. There was some embezzlement going on. His father, it was a homicide case in 1974. Where are we now?
Well, it's officially been open since last spring, since shortly after we started. We are still in the process. When it first started, it was a very strange situation because I was a victim's I was a victim of the crime as the oldest son of my dad, but I'm also a newspaper reporter.
Right.
And so
right.
it was just a really weird relationship we had with the sheriffs. I think there were a lot of false perceptions, and I think some of those obstacles have now been overcome. But it is technically an open investigation. There has been work done by the sheriff's department, no doubt, to try to as part of the investigation. We've done a lot of interviews.
And I can attest to that part. I was invited to a meeting that you had. There were multiple people from the sheriff's department in attendance at that meeting, and they even talked about the many hours that they had.
So it is an open investigation, but again, there's no physical evidence left. So we're in the process of trying to interview as many people as we can that may or may not have known something about the case or know someone who, and so, we're kind of hoping. I mean, I'm sure you watch. I've been watching my whole life these crime shows, and I really watch them now. But it's amazing how when you watch these crime shows, and you start drawing little things from like they did this and they did this, and now maybe
like
we
you're
can
saying,
do this.
maybe we could do that.
And think in rationales and judgment and
why don't my brothers and I do this and
so it's we're just hoping that somehow what I pray is that I interview the right person and that person says the right thing.
What does it feel like, Kevin? I mean, I have somewhat of a perspective a little bit, but what does it feel like to you? The not knowing, I can't even imagine what kind of weight that must feel like on your heart and your soul, your brothers and your mother.
It's really been hard in one way for me because when it happened, I do what I do, I think, largely because this happened.
Of what, because, I mean, essentially, in many ways, your life stopped that day because your father was the victim of a horrific crime. Right. Your whole world changed.
What I did was I sunk everything. Sports became my outlet. Whenever the 2 or 3 years after my dad died was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine so.
It was just our lives were chaotic.
If you thought something was
so
amiss.
Anytime anything that I didn't like was going on, I just went to sports. And so
really,
I sunk everything. My getaway was always sports, and that became basically my life largely. And it also helped. I became a born again Christian in 1979, so my relationship with God gave me strength, and that helped me as well.
Yeah,
but I absolutely did. But I always went to sports. Well, since this investigation started,
I
don't care as much about sports. All I think about is the case.
Wow.
And so I have struggled more working at the paper, and I have struggled more with my focus here at the radio station because it works in reverse. My whole life was sports, and now every waking moment I think about is this investigation.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Is it just now finally time, Kevin? Is it time to go back, look at it all, hope that, I mean, I know that you're asking for a miracle.
Right.
And I think people understand that who are listening, but it's not to say that miracles haven't been granted before. And as you pointed out earlier, in just the last, 10 minutes or so, you have learned so much more about the case, about your mother, about your father, about the people who were around
Absolutely.
at that time. You've gained a wealth of knowledge.
It's really more about getting rid of what really happened. A lot of people have theories as to what happened.
Sure.
But
you do too. I mean, you play if this happened, if there was this, if there was that.
You just want to know what happened. And in addition to that, understand, I live in Lafayette. I've lived here my whole life. My two brothers, we have another
Right, you
brother.
have a fourth brother.
But they all live out of town. And I drive almost every day of my life by where it happened. And so
every day?
Almost every day of my life I drive. I live 2 miles from where it happened.
I've talked to you, countless times. I went to high school with your brother.
Yes.
I knew your mom a little bit. I don't think that ever has sunk in for me.
Yeah.
So almost every day
almost
you
every
drive
day of
by.
my life I drive by where it happened or right over it.
God,
and crazy. And would it have been 77? So 3 years later, my mom remarried, and she was 8 months pregnant with my fourth brother.
Yeah.
And about, I don't know how far, 1,000 feet or just further up that road, we got in a head-on collision with a 16-year-old kid with a beer in his hand, and cracked my mom's sternum, and she struggled with that the rest of her life as well. But it's amazing in that 1,000 feet of that road how much of my life is.
Your life is on that road, Kevin.
And about 500 feet from there, when I moved out of my house after high school, I moved in with my best friend, and we lived in a trailer right next to where my dad was killed, like right there. So so I drive on that road almost every day of my life. So I am, I can't get away from it, and at this point certainly don't want to get away from it. I want to know what happened there that day. Yes.
And you should be able to find out. We will continue our conversation. Kevin Foote, we're talking about the murder of his father, Russell Foote, in 1974. We've got more to come on the way. We are joined by Kevin Foote. He is the local sports editor, if you will. So it's the sports engagement editor. That's the old fancy title.
That's a fancy Gannett term, but nobody knows what that means. So we just say sports editor, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Sports editor at the Daily Advertiser. Now, Kevin is also part of our sister station, ESPN 1420. And often it's so fun because my office is right near where the control room is for ESPN 1420. So when Mr. Passionate gets revved up, boy, you love to talk up a storm.
Me and Steve, we tend to debate. We love, that's fun because
it is, right?
Again, we both had very serious things happen in our lives, and so sports it's an escape. Is almost too cliche of a word. I mean, it's just I sunk so much of my passion and tried to keep the bitterness that I had in life was sunk into sports. That's why I think I'm so passionate about the Saints and the Astros, and
because it was bitterness, anger, frustration, a huge sadness,
disillusionment, all that stuff,
and some denial. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So you sunk it all into sports, but all of this gets revved up. So when did you and Chris start investigating everything, all the circumstances surrounding your father's murder?
The first phone calls would have been the last week in January of 2017, last January.
Okay.
And then it's been,
So how do you handle your family and your job at ESPN 1420 and being the sports editor at the Advertiser and all of this?
It's for a while, I go through periods where, like, when the first 2 or 3 months, Michelle was like, okay, look, enough. Like my wife, Michelle, it's just like it's all I talked about. Every conversation went back to that. And so it was like, okay, we need to try to
check it a little bit.
So there would be stretches where I'm not known as a patient person. And yet, so there are times during these, whatever that is, 15 months or however long that is, where I just had to say, look, I have to try to not to think about it because they've been saying, wait for this. We have to wait on this and wait on this. And I'm like,
make sure that you did everything the right way, basically, right? And you didn't want to step on any toes.
No, but I also...
You've been waiting long enough.
They say, wait, you got to wait for we've been waiting all this time. It's like, well, let's wait until this happens. Then we'll see if we're going to talk. Well, like, I'm tired of waiting. Right. That's what the inside is telling me. And yet they're saying you got to wait.
Right. It's been, 44 years now?
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, at some point.
So it's like, we got to go. We got to go. We got to go.
And they, at the sheriff's office, they've put in a lot of man hours on this.
Yes.
But, from your side, you continue on now. And, because there are just things you still want answers to, and you're hoping something else can be revived with a person who then might bring more attention back to the case.
Right. I just hope that in putting it out, obviously, the very first thing we wanted was for someone who's never said anything to come out and say something. We haven't had that so far. But we've had people who have shown interest that have helped, increase our possibilities of it. And also, there are still a lot of people that we haven't interviewed yet that I want to interview. And
wow. So you got a long way to go still.
We still got there's still a lot to do, in my opinion, of things before I feel like, okay, we've done everything. At this point, I've said it before. Once I did that very first interview and then the second interview, there was no more. Once you open it, there's no turning back. So you have to go back and uncover everything you could possibly uncover, and before I say, okay, I'm done with this. And in some ways, even when if let's just say it never gets solved, and the sheriff's investigation technically ends, I don't know that it's really going to end for me, because I'm constantly going to be trying to look for more rocks to turn over and see if there's something underneath.
And it'll be a lifelong quest for you. Is it also a way to honor your father?
Yeah, it's more Mom. I remember my first reaction when I heard that, when I had the first interview that just kind of, I literally picked up the phone to call her
your mom
and tell her what I had just learned or what I was just told to me. And so it took me 3 or 4 phone calls before that urge. And still now it's like, man, I wish Mom was still here. Now, there's some things that I found out through the thing that it's probably good that Mom wasn't here.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a reason why. Well, one thing in particular, I'm not going to say, but that I found out during the reading the case file and all, that it's a good thing Mom wasn't living. But when we read the case file, there's even now I was like, man, I wish I could talk to her and ask her this question, because she probably knows the answer to this question.
Yeah.
And so that's frustrating. But at the end, her last few years, she always wanted to know the answer. And I think, justice is important, very important, but I think even more important than justice is just knowing what happened. Like, I've heard what people think happened.
Right.
I want to know what really happened. And it's even possible. I watch all these crime shows. It's even possible to quote unquote get justice and still not know what really happened.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know what really happened more than anything. And it would be, if I could find out what really happened and get justice, then that's just, that's hitting a grand slam.
Oh, absolutely.
But I would take a ground rule double even at the end of this and just find out what happened. And I'm hoping one day to be able to do that.
If people are listening and they think they have information, or if they, come across a picture or whatever the case may be, what's the best way to contact you?
Best way to contact me is to call me at the paper, 289-6317, or send me an email at the paper, which is kfoote, KFOOTE, at theadvertiser.com, THEadvertiser.com. And, you hear it all the time on these crime shows. Even if it's just something that you think is little. What that means is, I have a different perspective of what that means. What that means is, it might be little, but it might be, what you're telling me might give me somebody else to interview.
That's right.
That might know way more than you do. So it's amazing.
If you even know anything about the case, call or email.
Call or email me. Yes, it would. Again, if it just gives me another rock to turn over, to look under, you just never know which rock. For instance, the guy Jerry Mitchell I was telling you about, he went back, and one of the things he's given us advice is to interview everyone in their past that you possibly could interview.
Right.
Because you never know which one of them is going to know something. Now, and look, we might get to the point in this where we find out something, and it's somebody completely different than the lead investigator on the case 74 told us.
Sure.
We have no idea.
Absolutely.
I just want to know what the answer is. And so he was doing a interview with someone from Felix Vale's past, and it was told, I played Truth or Dare with him one night, and he told me, you think that's something? I killed my first wife.
Whoa.
So, you never know what someone's going to tell you. And so, I don't know that we're ever going to get something like that, but and so we're just in that process of, again, like I keep saying, just turning over and trying to interview as many people and finding out as many people as we can from the prime suspect back then, and see where it takes us.
All right. If you have any thoughts at all, information-wise, or if you know anything about that day or any of the circumstances surrounding the murder of Russell Foote, even if you think the information is insignificant, Kevin, one more time, your phone and your email.
289-6317, or my email, kfoote, KFOOTE, at theadvertiser.com.
And we're not done, because we'll have part 2 of our conversation with Kevin Foote coming up on another edition of Up Close next weekend. Join us then.